President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump just exiting Air Force One, beginning their first part of their second state visit to the UK. You can see them walking down the steps of Air Force One there, being greeted by the US Chief of Protocol, Ambassador Monica Crowley. A warm welcome there. And also by the Viscounthood Lord-in-Waiting on behalf of the King. Also there, the Right Honourable Yvette Cooper, the Secretary of State for Foreign Commonwealth and Development Affairs. Also part of the greeting party, Mrs. Jennifer Tolhurst, His Majesty's Lord Lieutenant of Essex. Mr. Ben Julian Harrington, the Chief Constable of Essex Police, the President just shaking hands there. And he's also being greeted by Mr. Gareth Cowell, the Managing Director of London Stansted Airport. So this, the first formal part of President Trump's second state visit to the UK. You can see all smiles there. Melania Trump, and they will make their way along through the Guard of Honour.
One wonders what is said in those moments, doesn't one? You know, the politeness is the, how do you do, nice flight, how was the meal? I mean, you know, you wonder what they say in those moments. You never get really to hear what's said at those particular points in time.
And Gary, just as we watch
one now, as you can see.
As we watch the President and First Lady, just give us your sense of the significance of this state visit, his second state visit, as we have heard so many times, unprecedented.
It's incredibly important for both countries, Ben, I think. It's incredibly important for both countries. And you can see him shaking, I've been told he's shaking the hand of Lord Hood at there, going on to Marine One. Yeah, incredibly important. The President sees this as an endorsement of him as a real historical individual. Not an aberration in US history, as many wondered whether he was going to be after that first term, but as a real sign, an absolutely visible sign that he is part of history now, a real part of history, a real legacy type president. And also for the UK, of course, as James was mentioning earlier, you know, every Prime Minister since Churchill, every Prime Minister, perhaps bar Harold Wilson, maybe with the exception of Harold Wilson, has regarded Britain's national interest as being absolutely bound up with staying as close to the United States as possible. Keir Starmer's no different, be that Conservative, be that Labour Prime Ministers down the age, as I say, perhaps with the exception of Harold Wilson, believes that Britain's national interest is completely bound up with being as close to the United States as possible. So that is the significance for Britain in maintaining that relationship with the changed political environment here, or there in the United States rather, with the changed political environment here in the UK, and of course after Brexit as well. All these factors that have moved the chess pieces on the board in an extraordinary way in the last few years in terms of these relationships that we thought were fixed. And I can hear the rotors now starting to warm up a bit on Marine One.
Yeah, it's about to take off, Gary, clearly, isn't it, for central London, for Winfield House, the American ambassador's residence, as we were saying. And we were talking earlier, James Landale was saying, you know, he does adore all the pomp and pageantry, but this will be, in the end, a transactional visit. And what is your sense of what the two countries will get out of it, do you think?
Well, the transactional visit is right, and for the United States and for Donald Trump, it's the pictures, it's the imagery, but it's also the hard cash in terms of investment into the United States, tying Britain into some of the deals that he wants Britain to do, and the money he wants to invest. Okay, And in terms of Britain, of course, it's maintaining that relationship that we've talked about, maintaining that close relationship, and also trying to tear down some of the barriers that Britain has faced, particularly on some of the tariff issues. We know they've got a deal, but really, what are the details of that trade deal? It's not very clear whether all of it is done and dusted, far from done and dusted. And of course, some real tensions in the last week, particularly over losing Peter Mandelson as the ambassador. He was liked in Washington, the administration liked him, and you know, the fact of him going because of Jeffrey Epstein only puts the focus back onto that issue, which has been a difficult one for Donald Trump and the administration to sort of shrug off over the last few weeks. You see them starting to head off now. Green one moving away now, you can tell. Not still on the ground, but about to take off, I think.
And he does have a real affection for this country, doesn't he? I mean, he seems to love it here.
He does. He does. I mean, he was here privately in July, as we know, visiting his golf courses in Scotland, Turnberry, and also up in Aberdeen as well. He was also, you know, he has Scottish heritage, as we know. He seems pretty proud of that. That's what we're going to see, I think, the Scots Guards at Windsor tomorrow as well. And there's an affinity. I think there is an affinity. And there's an affinity in a way, oddly, which there wasn't with Joe Biden. Joe Biden was always rather sort of arm's length when it came to Britain. There were warm words, but you never felt Joe Biden really liked it. A colleague of mine once shouted to him, "Have you got a word for the BBC?" And Joe Biden replied, "I'm Irish," he said.
And we know that
Irish at the BBC now, Gary.
Yes, that's right. So there you go. But yeah, no, a real affection, I think, a genuine affection. But it's hard-nosed. Donald Trump is a man that isn't subject to sentiment if it undermines his interests or America's interests. That's for sure, absolutely. You remember I interviewed him a few weeks ago, and I asked him, you know, do you trust? I asked him if he trusted Vladimir Putin. He said, and there was a long, long pause, and he said, "Frankly, I trust almost no one." And I think that tells you a lot about this president in terms of the way he sees the world and the way he sees relationships in this world.
And he also seems to quite like Keir Starmer, doesn't he? I mean, from all the conversations they've had, every time he talks about Keir Starmer, he really talks about him warmly. He says they have political differences, but they get along, in his words.
Yeah, he calls him a liberal, doesn't he? And but I like him anyway. And I think it is a sign of, in some ways, the sort of political genius of that moment in the Oval Office, as James was talking about earlier, with the letter from King Charles, handling it over. The president absolutely loved that. I mean, he absolutely cooed over that. It was an act of, as I say, pretty political savvy on the part of whoever came up with that idea in Downing Street. Really ought to get a prize, because that was pretty good. And it became a template for other world leaders, other European leaders. You know, this is how we go to the White House and don't get completely kebabbed. You know, that's frankly what it is. And I think Keir Starmer can take some credit for having sort of written the playbook. And he's obviously hoping to continue that relationship during these next 2 days. It'll be down to the King and Queen tomorrow. I think that'll be pretty smooth sailing. There's an obvious affection there for the monarchy. You know, there's been lots of talk in the United States, not entirely frivolously at times, about Donald Trump as a sort of king-like figure. You know, so he's not necessarily shrugged that off at times. So he will enjoy, I think, tomorrow and that ride in Windsor Great Park and all those flybys, etc., the state dinner.